Today we're going to introduce you to the Masterflow 240V flushing rig, its components, and then through to the connecting and bleeding of the rig to a flow return circuit within an apartment block. The Masterflow 240V flushing rig control panel is fitted with an emergency stop, an on-off switch, and the variable speed drive is controlled by this speed adjustment. You can also read the hertz of the motor and record that as part of your record process when performing the flush on the system. Moving through to the 240V variable speed motor, the controller drives the 240V variable speed motor and pump, which is then connected to a balancing valve through to the system. We then have an oven top balancing valve where it allows you to set the flow rate and measure it with a oven top manometer, which is then connected to the building. We have a bag filter, or known as a filter, for the rest of today. We have the connection hoses, which are going to connect to the building's flow and return, which has already been charged and bled. We just have to ensure that we get as much air out as the system here before we pump it through to the unit. You can also utilise the Masterflow's flushing rig filter unit and ball valve on the top as a means to add chemical for the purposes of flushing agents or inhibitors into the system by simply pouring in the quantity of chemical that you would require based on the volume of the system from your preferred supplier. Connection of the Masterflow flushing rig is by the provided hoses, which come fitted with cam locks as a quick connect system to the building's flow and return lines. We're now going to move through to demonstrate that connection, the bleeding of the air and the starting up of the unit and measuring of the flow. Connecting of the hoses to the flow and return lines of the building is, as I mentioned before, via the cam locks. The cam locks connect directly onto the fittings that we've already attached to the building, and then they can lock on. So that is the connection of one line. And David is going to pass me the second line, and we connect the second line here. With our flow and return lines connected to the building, we're now going to charge the system and bleed as much air out as possible. I've utilised a free port on the top of the inlet of the pump today to connect a mains water supply, because we don't actually have mains water supply connected to this part of the building as such. So with that mains water supply connected, I can then start to bleed air at this point of the filter, and I'm demonstrating that now, as you can hear. We're bleeding lots of air out, so therefore we're charging water into the filter. Our next point is we'll have to move to the actual connection points and complete the same process and charge those lines as best we can to minimise the amount of air that we are going to put back through to the system. Now we're going to open the oven top valve and start to fill the hoses on the flow side of the system. And that is simply turning the handle to 10 turns, in this case as a DN50. Now we'll open the ball valve, which is on the return side from the system, and charge this return line as best we can. Throughout the process, we always come back to the bleed valve on top of the filter and just bleed off any air that may be present. We've pre-bled both the flow and return hoses to the cam lock connection points at this stage, so we've got minimal air entering the system. Now we'll actually open the flow and return to the building. And we're now set to start up the Masterflow flushing rig and start that flowing process with your inhibitor chemical now being injected to the system as well. Fitted with an isolator on the side of the control panel, that's our first step, is to turn the unit on. You'll hear it start up. The screen will go through a startup procedure, provide an indication of the stopped at this point in time. Ensuring that the speed control is at the minimum point, we can then switch to the on position, which is engaging the controller to the pump. Then we can start to increase the speed of the pump, be it slow initially, until you can hear that there is water flowing and not air as such. We've got a pretty good prime system today, so we can actually bring this up a bit quicker. As previously mentioned, I'm going to head back to the air bleed point and just double check that there's no air within the filter system, which looks perfect at this point in time. Now we can actually connect the oven top manometer, be it to a device in this case. So I'm going to use my mobile phone with the phone connected to the oven chop manometer, we're now actually reading the flow rate that's running through the system by the flushing rig. We're at 10 turns, we've added 10 at this point. We can increase this flow rate by coming back to the control panel and increasing the speed of the pump, or you can adjust the oven chop valve and reset the flow rate if you desire. I particularly like to use the variable speed on the control panel itself to adjust my flow rate, so I'm going to demonstrate that now. And at this point you can hear that the pump is starting to speed up. We've got quite the volume flow going through the system. We've got quite the volume flow going through the system today at full speed at 3.214 litres a second at full speed. This system requires 1.4 litres a second, which is 110% of its design. So I can now speed down the pump and motor to that 1.4 litres a second. And we can start our flush test. There you go, 1.4. And then we would continue with that 1.4 litres a second, in this case 110% design, flushing for the required procedures flush time. And then we would stop the unit and drain down those hoses again. So that completes today's demonstration of the Masterflow 240V flushing rig. Should you have any further inquiries, reach out to the team at Masterflow at any stage and they can assist you with those inquiries.